Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walt Whitman Initiative's Robust American Love Speaker Series. My name is Karen Karbiener, and I am president of the Whitman Initiative. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have the mission of celebrating New York City's literary legacy. We serve as an organizing center for cultural activism and poetry-related events, just like the one you're about to enjoy. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram and tune into our YouTube channel to explore lots of different presentations as part of this series. If you like what we're doing, there are many ways to support us. Please visit that support us link at our website to find a PayPal link and address for checks. We're fueled by our love of poetry, but we do need to sustain our programs, events, and initiatives, and we appreciate you very much. We decided to offer this speaker series, note the word speaker, not lecture, to present timely public-facing conversations on Whitman's life, work, and legacy. You'll hear conversations and enjoy presentations by all sorts of people. They're not academic talks, but free, open, informal discussions that we end by inviting you in for a Q&A with our speakers. So if you're watching this live right now, please make sure to post your questions in the chat. And I'll try to get to those at the end of our hour. And if you miss one of our events, you can always catch up and watch them again on our YouTube channel. Just a few announcements, sorry, before we get to this very exciting talk today. I'm reiterating for the umpteenth time that we have our Song of Myself Marathon live coming up on September 17th, Brooklyn Bridge Park from 3 to 6 p.m. We are totally thrilled to be back in person in the park. So those of you that are able to come on that day, Saturday, September 17th, we will soon have a sign up for the 52 sections. It's free, it's open, no commercial representation, just a joy of poetry outside and in view of Whitman's New York. So hope to see you there. We also are really thrilled to announce that our Walt Whitman Initiative Tain Poetry Library, which has surpassed about 600 volumes, will be opening up officially as part of the Brooklyn Book Festival on September 30th from 4 to 6 p.m. We've received so many donations, I don't even know where to start thanking everyone, but maybe I'll start with St. Francis College in Brooklyn, who gave us pretty much their entire Whitman collection to add to what our primary donor Susan Tain has given us, the Library of America has given us. We're thrilled to offer a free access library for anyone without any sort of institutional affiliation. And I hope you can come down on September 30th. Again, that 2-hour slot to 91 South Street. It is the home of the Fulton Stall Markets, which is a farmers nonprofit, an actual New York City farmers co-op that we have partnered with and that has given us this glorious historic space in an 1810s building just facing the East River. So you'll be able to enjoy performances. We've got Tim Cusack coming and doing his I Ping the Body Electric, which everybody loved last year at the Poetry Festival. Compagnia de Columbari is coming and doing a performance. And of course, we're going to invite you all to read, maybe even, and this goes just with our hosts and how they feel, from a particularly beautiful balcony where our books are stored. So please come by. Fulton Stall Markets will be providing snacks. They have all sorts of healthy options, all New York City grown. We're very, very excited to be able to offer that service. And just like a last word about our creative partnership with the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project, we are really grateful for our partnership with these guys. They've been tremendously helpful as we've continued to try to gain some sort of protection for Whitman's house at 99 Ryerson Street, Brooklyn. For those of you that are concerned with that, I know there are quite a few people out there. We are continuing to do that, and with their blessing and with a lot of their help. So thanks, guys, at NYC LGBT Historic Sites Network. We really appreciate what you've done. But now getting to an incredible, I'm particularly honored with this presentation. We are honoring Ed Folsom, who has had an absolutely brilliant 50-year career as a Whitman scholar, teacher, and mentor. And joining me today is Matt Miller, one of his students from the University of Iowa. And the idea here is that we're going to start by talking about section 52 of Song of Myself, which some of you no doubt remember Ed reading at our online Song of Myself marathon this year. Just an absolute standout interpretation of that particular section. And that kind of got all of us started about Ed coming on the show and maybe delivering that again, but also tying in this momentous occasion of his retirement. So we will be talking about that ultimate final section of Song of Myself, very dear to so many. Also a W.S. Merwin poem that is inspired by that, called Whoever You Are. And then we're going to open it up to a discussion of Ed as a teacher scholar and, particular moments that stand out and just wisdom from him for those of us that really do care about teaching. And I look to Ed as a mentor of mine, as a fantastic example of someone who is truly inspiring. So Ed, we are so very pleased to have you here. Welcome to the show. Oops, sorry, I don't know if we can hear you.
Thanks, Karen.
There we go. Step one.
So great to be with you. Matt, great to see you again. Karen said you were my student at the University of Iowa, which is true in the past tense. Matt currently at Yeshiva University. And it's wonderful to see you. Some of you may have noticed that Eric Conrad was on the list of people, another former student of mine, but unfortunately is sick with COVID at the moment. So we wish Eric well, and we'll try to limp on without him. Karen mentioned that I read section 52 of Song of Myself, the closing section of the poem, at the Song of Myself marathon. And I thought we could start today by reading it again and thinking a little bit about this amazing final section, because when we get to this point of the poem, it's always seemed to me a massive challenge for Whitman. How do you leave the Song of Myself? And it becomes one of the great disappearing acts in all of literature, I think. It's truly an amazing section, and I'll look forward to talking with you about it. I'll put it up on the screen.
Ed, just a moment before you do that, because I just want to make sure that everyone knows, I think everyone knows your name without doubt, but I asked you for a brief bio, and I was just anticipating that and just wondering how someone like Ed Folsom can actually write a brief bio. So I'm going to share that with everyone just to frame some of the accomplishments that Ed has done. He is the Roy J. Carver Professor of English at the University of Iowa, just retired now after 50 years of teaching at Iowa and a few other places. Ed also is the editor of the Walt Whitman Quarterly Review. He is the co-director of the online Walt Whitman Archive. And forgive me, Ed, didn't you found the Walt Whitman Archive? That's your baby, isn't it?
Yeah, Ken Price and I together founded the Walt Whitman Archive. It was kind of grew out of an essay I did many years ago in the early 90s, where as we were just on the cusp of the computer revolution and beginning to think of things that we might be able to do in a computer environment that we had not been able to do in the print environment. And I began thinking about the possibilities of having a true variorum, that is, a place where you could go and actually see page by page all of the editions of Leaves of Grass, and then began thinking about having the manuscripts of all of Whitman's poems available and being able to press the magic button, which we're still working on developing, which will allow you to eventually call up any Whitman piece of writing and examine from the origins of that writing in a notebook or on the back of a scrap of paper, wherever it begins, through all of the manuscripts, through the various printings, through the corrections that he made on proof sheets, right up to the final version that he oversaw in his own lifetime. So we're getting there. We've added more and more. It's become something much more vast than I could have imagined at that time. And Ken Price read that essay and contacted me soon after and said, let's do it. And since neither one of us knew anything about computers, we had to find a group of graduate students who did. And that's how the archive began. And over the years, we've had amazingly talented people like Matt for years working on developing the archive. And we've now had probably, I think, about 125 scholars devoting at least a year of their career to the archive, many devoting decades to the archive now. And Matt Cohen has joined Ken and me as a co-director so that the archive looks like it's still got a long future to go after Ken and I are done.
What a spectacular gift to Whitman studies. In fact, you know, a way of growing Whitman studies in a way that I don't know if there was anything else that could do bigger and better. I still remember when it was the Whitman Hypertext Archive,
Yes.
when we still used terms like that. But, you know, on that, from this wonderful list of accomplishments of yours, I know that many people, including many of my students, they just rely on the archive. So thank you from so many of us for that. And also for the Whitman Series at the University of Iowa Press, an outstanding series of Whitman publications that many of us use as well. Ed has also written numerous books on Whitman and other American writers. He's won lots of different awards, a Guggenheim, many times a National Endowment for the Humanities winner, the National Archives, and his work has been chosen 4 times as a Choice Outstanding academic titles. So you probably have heard his voice many times and seen his face on all sorts of programs. You know, just I can't think of anyone else that represents Whitman studies as Ed does. And I know that the world agrees with me on that. But maybe a close second is Matt Miller. And just a word on Matt, who's a dear friend, and he's also on the board of the Whitman Initiative. He's a local New Yorker, teaches at Yeshiva at the Stern College in Manhattan of Yeshiva University. And he's actually the chair of the English department. And he's written also some tremendous books on Whitman, especially the latest book on the making of Leaves of Grass. And oh no, so forgive me, that one on the notebooks and journals. There's so many, Matt. There's so much good stuff. And he lives in Queens, in Long Island City. Matt, we're so glad to have you here too.
Thanks, Karen. You know, one thing I think both you and Ed share as a quality that kind of drew me to both of you at different times in my life is your clear and evident passion for not just Whitman, but poetry and literature in general, which is evident to people talking with you and, you know, every moment of our discussions with you. And when I was a grad student in Iowa, I was coming from the MFA program in creative writing there at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And so I guess I came with a different preparation than some other students, one that oriented me differently to literature. And I felt a little bit isolated from people that had the same both, I guess, aesthetic and even ethical priorities toward literature while I was there. I felt that the program was at a theory-intensive moment that I found alienating and off-putting intellectually. And Ed was my oasis there, because in addition to all the amazing successes, the accomplishments that you began to list, there's also that passion, that real deep love of literature that was the thing that I cared about the most. And I remember one moment, not related to Whitman, but to Emily Dickinson, when Ed volunteered to lead a student group, completely on his own time, no money, just, we're talking about one of the top scholars here, right? And he's willing to spend hours a week preparing lectures, preparing talks on Dickinson's poems, meeting with us regularly. The group grew and grew. It was a great experience, as good as any of the classes that I took there. And that's the quality that I endeavor to also represent. That's the thing that most inspires me and most makes me want to kind of live up to a certain model of teaching and scholarship, is that just drive and recognition that we're here for the literature. The literature's not here for us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so well said, Matt. And I guess, it's not in your bio, but to me, thinking of you as a poet comes first and foremost. And I guess that's the approach, right, that you had to Whitman, coming from a creative place and then finding Ed to be simpatico with connecting you with that poet.
Yeah, I don't think I ever shared any poems with Ed, but I think Ed just recognized that was important to me and acted accordingly. Ed has been friends with much more successful poets than myself, much more. I think including Merwin, who we'll be talking about today. And those personal connections with my heroes and the stories he told me about people like Merwin and Creeley and others. The lore of poetry Ed's a great sort of repository for the lore of poetry, and it's another thing I also try to aspire to. I have some stories myself, and I like to bring that to teaching and to how I represent literature, like Whitman did. Song of Myself is in some ways a collection of stories, as well as a disappearing act at the end.
Yeah, and I will just add that the Dickinson sort of graduate seminar that Matt was talking about, the deal for me was I agreed to do it as long as we would meet in a pub. And so we would meet at the Sanctuary, a pub in Iowa City, once a week. And the group really kind of outgrew the pub toward the end, but it was a great time. And one of the joys of teaching at Iowa over the past decade has been the opportunity to work with students like Matt from the creative writing side of English. We have the nonfiction writing program there, as well as the writer's workshop in poetry and fiction. And I've had over the years many students from all of those programs, as well as an undergraduate major now in English and creative writing, where we have poets from all over the country who are coming to study literature. And they've these folks have challenged me over the years to begin to work with them to understand the poetry from the inside out rather than the outside in. And I think as I've think back over my own teaching, that's really been the trajectory of my teaching. I've moved more and more from thinking of the cultural contexts around the poets to thinking about how whatever cultural context they had imbibed, how it worked their way back out into the poetry. And it's what's made the archive so useful over the years, because you can now sit down with the archive and open up Whitman's manuscripts and actually do a kind of writer's workshop with Whitman's poetry, where students can experience the poem in its most elemental states as it begins to develop. And I've had any number of undergraduate students talk about how seeing the origins of Song of Myself in little scraps of paper, little ideas jotted in notebooks, that it really gives them hope that they can produce something someday because they're writing those little jots of things, ideas, thoughts, lines, images on their own little pieces of paper and notebooks that they're carrying with them. And it humanizes a poet like Whitman a great deal to see those manuscripts, to recognize that Song of Myself did not emerge suddenly onto the page as Song of Myself, but was the result of decades of work.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite, or I should say, one of the works that you have done that I've used the most, which is your Song of Myself study, that in which you work with the poet Chris Merrill, and perhaps people know it from the online University of Iowa site, but I also love the book form of this, where you say a bit more from maybe the more critical side, and then we get the section of Song of Myself, and then we get Chris delivering from the poet's side. And what a fantastic introduction to a very complicated, big work. I've sent students to that so often, Ed. So yes, very grateful to you for the way in which you have been dialoguing with poets and bringing Whitman to us in a very human way, from beginners to, to successful career scholars. And I guess with that in mind, why don't we plunge into section 52? If you don't mind reading it, Ed, I know we would love to hear it.
Sure. So I put it up on the screen. This is from the Whitman Archive. And if you go to the Whitman Archive, those of you who use it regularly know this, but you have that little page icon at the top of every page in the archive that allows you to call up the actual printed page itself. So this is section 52. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt, to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you.
Okay, that is a way, I love your pacing with that reading, Ed. It really makes me think deliberately, because I hear it so often read so quickly. but appreciating the time that you're taking with it. And I guess our approach into this is really thinking about how Whitman is choosing to end a poem that he really doesn't want to end, right? So can you start us off with that? How does he end it? Where does he put us?
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's discussion, I think of it as one of the great disappearing acts in all of literature. Because when you get to this part of the poem, right before our eyes, he begins to depart as air, to be coaxed to the vapor and the dusk, to effuse his flesh in eddies, and generally just to dissipate into the landscape. That's what's always really attracted me to this section, this amazing evocation of what it would feel like for identity wrapped up in a body to unwrap itself back into the elements that it has spent a lifetime absorbing, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting. And we now will find the speaker of this poem nowhere and everywhere. That's the key, right? You won't be able to find this speaker anywhere, but you'll be able to find the speaker everywhere. Growing from the grass he loves, composted into the dirt beneath our boot soles, every atom belonging to him, now as well belonging to us and to the entire living world around us. So, that image of the hawk that opens it up, yopping his untranslatable yop over the roofs of the world, part of the quickly passing clouds, that scud. The vocabulary in this section is just so astonishing. I mean, the notion of effusing my flesh in eddies. On the reading that I gave at the marathon reading, I had backgrounds that went from hawk to scud to those clouds to the eddies themselves to the dirt to the boot sole in the dirt to the imprint of the boot sole in the dirt, and then ending with this image of the vast cosmos out there behind. I stopped somewhere waiting for you. When Whitman says, I too am untranslatable, he's thinking about a number of things, but one of them is how the I, the self, is finally not translatable from one set of materials to the other. Translate means to carry over from one state to another. And as the body decomposes, the self dissipates along with it. All its memories and ideas and thoughts effusing and departing like those materials of the body that gave the self identity, our sights and our hearings and our touches all vaporizing back into the things that generated those sights and sounds and memories. So I've always loved this, and it's a passage Matt mentioned that I was a friend of W.S. Merwin's, happy to be a friend. Merwin and I had the strange and wonderful connection of sharing the same birthday exactly 20 years apart. So that when I first met him, I was 25 and he was 45. And we celebrated my 35th and his 55th birthday together. And we also celebrated my 50th and his 70th birthday together. And I remember Merwin at that point saying, "This is it."
Ed, may I ask, just for those that will be interested what date that is.
Yeah, it's September 30th.
September
Final.
30th, the day
Yeah.
of our opening. That's okay. We'll definitely honor you again. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Merwin and I had many long and intense discussions about Whitman because he was not a Whitman fan, and he had lots of discussions with lots of his friends about Whitman. Bob Haas was a poet who was a good friend of Whitman's, but who also loves Whitman and would push Merwin to rethink Whitman, and Galway Cannell was another, and on and on and on. And in many discussions that William and I had over many years, we would come back to Leaves of Grass, and he would say, well, I've been reading it again, and you're right, there are some amazing passages, some really powerful passages, but I can't get over the manifest destiny Whitman. I can't get over the Whitman who just celebrated manifest destiny and celebrated the writing over of the continent and the decimation of the natural world, and on and on. And I would keep pushing him on, well, what were those passages you found that really were amazing and powerful? And he would be very reticent about stating them. I remember one time reading him, and this does relate to section 52. It's a poem that Whitman put at the end of his cluster From Noon to Starry Night, a little 4-line poem called A Clear Midnight. And I read this to William once without saying who wrote it. I just said, listen to this. And it was, this is thy hour, O soul, thy free flight into the wordless, away from books, away from art, the day erased, the lesson done, thee fully forth emerging, silent, gazing, pondering the themes thou lovest best, night, sleep, death, and the stars. Well, William loved it. And, that flight into the wordless that I think Merwin was always fascinated with. Where do these words come from? And where does the poet finally confront that which cannot be spoken? For Merwin, the holiest parts of the world were those that had not yet been named by human language. They were the only things somehow safe from our arrogation. And this image of the poet, I said, that's Whitman, and I said, think of the final section of Song of Myself. And Merwin said, that's where he has the barbaric yop, for God's sake. I said, yeah, but think more about beyond the barbaric yop, what is happening in that section. And this is ecology. This is the self as the world, the body as the world. And so that poem that I said we'd look at together, the Merwin poem, I like to think of as Merwin's kind of statement when he went back and really thought his way through section 52, because where he goes is this, to Whitman's two main characters in Song of Myself, I and you,
Right.
promiscuous you, right? That you that in English and virtually English only as a major language, where we use the same pronoun to refer to our most intimate lover and to a total stranger. Everybody's you. And Whitman saw that promiscuous you as a possibility for playing it out as something in American English that really suggests a democratic way of thinking. You don't create a hierarchy with your pronouns. You don't create a distinction and separation. And with what we're all going through now with pronoun usage is just an extension of what Whitman was beginning to play with, and where the I and the you go, where that in that final line, the I stops somewhere waiting for you. What Merwin goes to in this poem is who's the you and who's the I, and how do we ever know, even for ourselves, what the you is that we're thinking I will be 30 years from now, and what that's going to feel like when that I imagine being some you in the future is going to actually materialize or not. So that's the setup. I'd love to hear what you and Matt have to say about any of this at this point, and then maybe we could read the Merwin poem and think about it too.
Matt, yes, please. Hand is raised.
Okay, well,
Habits die hard.
do you want to go first? I don't mean
No, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Okay, so looking at Merwin and section 52, A Song of Myself, just to add a couple sort of dimensions to it, to what Ed was saying. An aspect of section 52 that I'm really drawn to is what I would call its lightness. It's lightness in the sense that the fiction writer Italo Calvino defined the term. Lightness as an overall project, a way of lightening death. The hawk, I think, is the maybe the keyhole into that section. The things that start out over our heads, I mean that in the casual, colloquial sense also. The clouds, the hawk, the yop itself. I always thought there's a bit of humor there in him, saying that his words are over our heads, over the roofs of our buildings, even, you know. You're not getting it. It's going, but you will get it, because I'm planting the seed for you to get it right here and right now. And it's done with a deftness of touch that belies the otherwise often tragic drama of self that is manifest in Song of Myself, which for all of its deconstructions of self is ultimately a poem that affirms the self. And that's how it's different from the poem by Merwin that we're about to read, because whereas Song of Myself is an ultimate affirmation of self, the Merwin lyric is a deconstruction of the self. And where Whitman's homespun mysticism has some connections to what I regard as Merwin's rather orthodox Buddhism, they're not identical. And their views on the self are evident in the comparison that we're about to make. I think Merwin sees the self as a complete illusion, and Whitman is much more troubled by the messiness of his self and the complexity of his own subjectivity. It's not so easy for Whitman to say goodbye to the self as he makes it out to be. But it's easier for Merwin, because I believe Merwin was an advanced practitioner of meditation and correctly recognized the nature of self is illusion. And he saw, life in that viewpoint, life and death are two sides of the same coin. There is no death, there's just manifestation. And the conditions that are right for the manifestation of self, and the conditions are not right for the manifestation of self. hadn't thought about this Merwin poem for a long time, but it had been brought to my attention once before Ed did in the email. And that was by a poet I studied with at Iowa named Mary Ruefle, who I admire a lot. I looked to see if I could find something published by Mary that reflected what she said to me. And I found this interview where she talks about the poem right here. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, maybe zoom back in, yeah, a little bit, Matt. We are looking at page 2.
This is an interview by with Mary Ruefle that she did with a. I'll get you the citation for it later if you want. The words are more important. So here's what she says. I didn't understand for years that my writing was really a form of, okay, she's talking about her audience. The question was, who do you think of who do you write poems for? That was the question. So she's talking about audience when she says, I didn't understand for years that my writing was really a form of listening to the audience, of telling them, of showing them that I was listening. And yet I was not born when they were speaking to me. So the unborn very much fit into this equation. It seems at such moments, the dead, the living, and the unborn are all one person, the you and the I the same. Your question is really another way of asking, who is the you? And the best answer I have ever had the privilege of reading is in the form of a poem, the poem Whoever You Are by W.S. Merwin, a poem which is addressed to Whitman, whose own famous or infamous you is, of course, brought into play. The poem sends shivers down my spine.
Nice.
I found that a helpful way of looking at the poem that I think Ed will do a better job reading it than I could. Should we go ahead and jump into it, Ed?
Sure. Let me put it up on the screen so that, oh yeah, you need to stop your
Yeah,
screen.
I think you
Okay.
got first, Matt.
I did.
So do you all see
Perfect.
the poem? Okay. Yep. So this is W.S. Merwin's Whoever You Are. By now, when you say, I stopped somewhere waiting for you, who is the I and who, come to that, is you? There are those words that were written a long time ago by someone I have read about who they assure me is you. The handwriting is still running over the pages, but the one who has disappeared from the script is you. I wonder what age you were when those words came to you, though I think it is not any age at all that is you. Stopping and waiting under the soles of my feet this morning, this waking, this looking up is you. But nothing has stopped, in fact, and I do not know what is waiting, and surely that also is you. Every time you say it, you seem to be speaking through me to some me not yet there, who I suppose is you. You said you were stopping and waiting before I was here. Maybe the one I heard say it then is you.
First thing I notice is how the left-hand margin and the right-hand margin and the pronouns, the yous on the right-hand margin in the Merwin poem versus the I's and the U's in the left-hand margin of the Whitman poem, yeah, which is, of course, related to subjectivity and objectivity, both in the sense of being and in the grammatical, syntactical sense within the sentence. Then, of course, the lack of punctuation, the kind of like floating in the air sense of Merwin's lines. Whitman's lines are much more grounded in syntax and punctuation. and that adds to the drama of the poem. Whereas this, it feels more like an interior poem. It's like a more gentle interior musing that, at least how I hear it in my mind. I don't know. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah,
Ed's, and like the word disappearing act is good because Whitman's is a performance of the self. That disappearing act captures that. This is not a disappearing act. This is about self, about selfhood. It's not an act at all. And like that's, I think, a good way to begin to compare them. I do think Whitman's whole poem is a performance, and this is not a performative poem by Merwin.
Yeah, it feels very earnest to me too. You know, I was looking for irony and I'm not sure I see it, right? Like he's really working. And I think, you know, I'm going back, Ed, to your really lovely phrase, the promiscuous you. I guess for me, also a generous you. So when I teach or try to understand section 52 and think about the word song in the title, Song of Myself, I often think, well, is you me? You know, if I'm reading this, the you becomes me. So I see Merwin wrestling with the same conundrum, you know, with the pronouns, which is great. And Matt, back to your thing about the lack of punctuation, I must admit, because I think I don't know Merwin as well as either of you, that second line, it took me quite a while to try to figure out what he was saying with the come to that. Because
yes.
without the commas, it's a really hard line to understand. But I know that Whitman also loved playing, at least early on, with punctuation, you know, with the ellipses and even with that dropped period, the famous drop period at the end of this poem. I was curious if Merwin knew that story. Do you know, Ed?
Yeah, I told it to him. So
That's the awesome thing about hanging out with Ed Folsom. Yeah, I told it to him.
Yeah, he was quite taken with that because he had not known that there was a period there originally, and but it is interesting in Merwin's unpunctuated poetry from, you know, basically the 60s on, when he decided to simply lift punctuation out of his poetry and describes it as feeling as if his poems had lifted off the page, as if the punctuation had stapled them onto the page, and now they floated in a way that he liked because it was a continually altering and shifting linguistic landscape rather than a pinned down syntactic landscape. So I think he would have responded very positively to your confusion about the second line. I mean, I think part of the punctuation, or part of the lack of punctuation, invites misreadings, rereadings, unreadings, second readings. So who is the I and who come to that is you? It's that strange syntax that the promiscuous you in English sets up, right? We use a plural verb for a singular pronoun. We don't say you is, we say you are. And so what syntactically, when you stop to think about it, does that suggest, or does that mean that we assign a plural verb to a singular second person pronoun? And it's the only time we do that. And so in English, there's no way to know when you say you are beautiful, whether we are speaking to a person or to a group of people. And, you know, I think Merwin is, in this poem, loving that ambiguity and playing on it, as Matt was noting that right-hand margin, that you, sometimes two in the two-line stanzas and some, but always at least one of the lines ending in you. And again, of course, the poem ending without punctuation, as Merwin was intrigued, as is everyone who reads the 1855, unless you happen to see one of the 6 or 7 copies that has a period, you see it with no period. And it is striking how, as Merwin said, it lifts the poem off the page and keeps it going on. Entire readings of Song of Myself were based on the idea that Whitman was at his most radical at the moment he decided to drop the period. Little did they know that it was simply a printing disaster in the Rome Brothers printing shop.
But also a decision, right, to keep it left out. Which that's where I always go, like, got to give him some credit for that.
Yeah, although he went ahead and bound up the books that had the period in it. Right. And then he came back in 1856 and put the period in and kept it in from then on. So, it was a decision, but it was probably an economic decision as much as an aesthetic decision, but it had aesthetic ramifications that Whitman either did or didn't know at that point. I mean, I think Matt has offered a very interesting way into kind of thinking of this meditative meditation on what and how the I and the you relate. And I think his response to the Whitman poem in discovering that it is not a simple matter when you encounter the Whitman you to decide how and what that you refers to. As you were suggesting, Karen, you read the poem and you can feel Whitman speaking personally and intimately to you individually in 2022 in Iowa City. But you can also just do a little bit of a shift and hear him speaking to everybody in the world, and potentially that you feel it fluctuate, you feel it pull itself in to you intimately and pull itself out to everyone in the world, and then to pull itself even in the most intimate moments in the poem back and forth, where you say, it is just Whitman, just him and me on this page right now with this book. But then you say, but it's also anyone else who happens to be open to this page, reading him somewhere in Iceland. And it's happening at this moment for them as well. The you is promiscuous in that way. It speaks intimately, but it keeps speaking intimately to a continually shifting person that it refers to. Merwin seems less interested in that than he seems interested in the whole idea of the you that Whitman may be confronting, that is a Walt Whitman at a different point in his life than the Whitman was who wrote that you. I think of Whitman or of Merwin. Merwin wrote a poem, very short little poem called In the Winter of My 38th Year. And I've always been struck by the title. I think Merwin did write it in his 38th year, but he was also very aware of Whitman writing Song of Myself, I now 37 years old in perfect health begin. It's as if in his ongoing song to find himself, Merwin puts himself a year older than Whitman starting out and dwells on his sense of estrangement from myself. This is the poem in the winter of my 38th year. It sounds unconvincing to say when I was young, though I have long wondered what it would be like to be me now, as far from myself as ever. You know, it's that distance from the self that, as Matt was suggesting, we feel Whitman enacting at this point, performing at this point, that I'm ceasing to be me, and what is left of me is you. You now you are the me that I promised at the beginning, every atom belonging to you as good belongs to me, every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. So that the poem begins with I and ends with you. And the most radical metaphor of the poem is I am you. And, you know, that when you begin working out those implications, it is Whitman giving up his identity, but in a performative act, as Matt says. And when it gets to the Civil War and you get to something like the end of Memoranda During the War, when he has that amazing long sentence of, you know, the million dead too summed up. And what he keeps his faith in is that hundreds of thousands of young men that he has nursed 100,000 of them himself, has stopped by their beds and talked with them, and as they die, the earth absorbs them, and they are in every grain of wheat we eat, and they're in every breath of air we take. Their atoms have dissipated like the end of Song of Myself, and they are what we have to build the future out of. But he now says, in a way he does not say in Song of Myself, the one thing that compost can never produce again is that single I, that one, that soldier I knew that is no more. And when that identity dissolves, as much as the atoms that made up that body are now everywhere and part of all of us, they will never again produce in this world the one identity that was lost. And I think that's the aspect of Whitman that Merwin ultimately was most fascinated with. And this is one of his very few poems responding specifically to a poet. And I'm fascinated that it would turn out to be, of all poets, Whitman, because he had so many wonderful things to say about other American writers. But Whitman, he generally spoke in very negative ways about. But this poem, I think, he finds a mystery in Whitman that resonates with the central mystery in all of Merwin's work.
Well, I would venture to say that what brought Merwin to Whitman was you.
whoever that is.
Wow. Well, I must say, just as we began by asking how Whitman tried to end a poem that he didn't want to end, I have to ask you, Ed, how do you end 50 years of teaching? I mean, the incredible richness of this discussion reminds me what the world is just about to lose by losing you as a teacher. So how are you doing with all of this? I mean, I know you have a lot of other things going on, which is fantastic, but these discussions, the heart of it, I feel like I've learned so much from you at International Whitman Week and today. I'm sure Matt joins me with this, but how do you end 50 years of teaching?
Yeah, I guess the quick and easy answer is I don't. You know, I'll be teaching at the University of Bamberg this fall, and you know, I hope we're going to have International Whitman Week again in Rome this coming June, and I plan to teach there. And I'll always be teaching. I've never it's I guess if there's any sort of secret to my career, it's that I have never been able to draw lines between my scholarship and my teaching. They just every piece of scholarship I've done has enhanced my teaching, and every bit of teaching I've done has enhanced my scholarship. And so I can't see that changing. I don't see myself in retiring from the University of Iowa giving up teaching so much as giving up administration and committee meetings. Those I can do without. The teaching will just, there will always be occasions for the teaching. I'll find a pub somewhere where another group of people will want to talk about Dickinson and Whitman.
I think there will be no problem with that, Ed. What an incredible treat. And may I ask, and I'm going to leave room for Matt here too, but I wondered if you had any advice for people who really care about teaching. After 50 years of teaching, is there some tidbit that you can throw our way? Food for thought.
Yeah, I guess the thing that has sustained my teaching over the years has been my decision not to teach the things I'm most used to teaching, but to teach the things that confuse me or bother me. One Whitman poem I come back to and teach all the time is When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, because it was a poem I heard my honors English teacher in 11th grade read the day that John Kennedy was assassinated. And while I did not understand a word of the poem, it was the only language I heard that during those horrendous days that seemed somehow appropriate to the occasion. And I've come back to that poem hundreds and hundreds of times to teach it, and it remains such a mystery for me because it's wrapped up in that mystery of that original nexus of events but you know, I just keep going to different places in Whitman and finding new power there. Lately, I've been fascinated. I've been writing about and teaching his old age poems and just finding endless surprises and power and beauty there, informed by all the reading and the teaching of the other Whitman, but opening up new areas every time I teach to keep it fresh in my own approach, fresh in my own mind. I think I think the saddest thing I run into are people who say they've given up teaching because it's become stale for them. They just feel like they're going through the motions, doing the same thing again and again. And so I've always just told myself, don't do that.
Matt, does this ring true as Ed's student?
I mean, Ed has lived up to that in every moment of his teaching with me. I mean, that's for sure. I actually had the intimidating job of filling in for Ed toward the end of my graduate student career and beginning of my career as a professor. Ed was on, I think, a Fulbright. Is that right, Ed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was away for at least a semester, and he arranged that so that I could be a visiting assistant professor there. And so in one semester, I went from being mentored by Ed to having to like almost, more or less fill his shoes by teaching his classes. And I never worked so hard I teaching as I did then, because I just, the standard I felt he had set for me. I mean, I prepared hours and hours and hours for every class just to try to just to give it a chance of working. Nearly almost as it did work out okay, I thought. In the end, I realized I couldn't be Ed. I had to be me. I had certain things. I was younger. I could like get along with them, as equals maybe more. So I tried to do that, and I tried to be, I couldn't be Ed. So I gave up eventually. But I did, what I picked up was the willingness to experiment and the chutzpah to give it a go, like it might not work. Sometimes things don't work, but if you're not, you're going to get that feeling of deadness and just going through the motions. That's going to come up much more quickly if you're not experimenting, if you're not taking those chances and risks. I think it's the ultra safe teachers that never risk failure that they get bored with teaching ultimately faster.
I agree. You're right.
So that's I guess something I appreciated in Ed as a student was the risks he took as a teacher. And I see teaching as like a kind of tight wire act. Mm-hmm. Things go wrong sometimes, horribly wrong. But those are also the moments that allow for the really inspiring things to happen. And you won't have one without the other.
How do you end a discussion that you don't want to end? I'm going to bring it back to that, maybe with a toast. How does that sound to you all? I dread to end this discussion, but our listeners know a 1-hour program. And so I'm going to ask our support network out there to undrape. And that means you, Tristan, and Bradley and Zelia, the team that is the team that makes all of this possible. And just a quick introduction, because they too deserve a toast. Oh, and Ed has a Song of Myself brew there. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Where is that made, Ed?
Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh my goodness.
The Leaves of Grass series of beer. Excellent beers.
All right. Well, we'll have to join you with that next time. But just a brief introduction, Tristan Pullen, director extraordinaire who's masterminding everything back there and is a Whitman Initiative board member. Tristan, thank you so much for being there. You're always there, and we so appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. And Zelia Raphael, who is my student, my PhD student at the University of Iceland, and is going to write the next great book on Walt Whitman. I am so sure of it. Zelia, thank you for being back there and doing your thing and helping us out with presenting Ed.
Thank you.
And Bradley Nelson, who maybe some people recognize the name as our first fellow at the Whitman Initiative. We're incredibly proud to support his work, and he's finishing up at CUNY and is now also on the board of the Whitman Initiative. Bradley, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And it was a great discussion today.
I thought so too. And maybe the only way out is a toast to Ed for 50 years and more of teaching as it continues in different ways. So does anybody want to offer a toast? Everyone's
You gotta
intimidated
cut out
by that.
the-
I know I'm intimidated to offer, but please go ahead, Matt.
I couldn't hear what you said at the very end. You asking us to offer a toast?
Oh yeah, like if anybody would like to offer a toast, and maybe we all could do it at the same time.
To an astonishing and inspiring career teaching, and to many more Tightwire acts for lucky students going forward. Here's to Ed.
Here's to Ed.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, Ed, we look forward to hearing a lot more from you, and I'm so glad that you mentioned International Whitman Week, which hopefully after many years, since 2019 when it was here in New York, it's been very quiet because of COVID, and hopefully 2023, we're talking about Rome. Is that right?
That is, yes, we'll be in Rome, and all signs are positive at this point. Who knows what the next few months will bring, but we will be announcing in October the decision, and assuming it's a positive decision, people can begin applying for the Whitman Week, which will be in early June of 2023 in Rome.
And I'm
Yeah.
going to
Sapienza University.
Sapienza University in Rome, and encourage all students of Whitman, from advanced undergrads to graduates to professionals to scholars, to look at the Transatlantic Whitman Association website. I'm sure we can put something up at the Whitman Initiative as well, because it is, if you enjoyed what happened today, you get a week of that at International Whitman Week. It's an extraordinary chance to talk to people like Ed and like Matt, and just really get to know Whitman from the inside out. Matt, Ed, thank you so much for this incredible discussion. It's one for the books.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Ed.
Bye, everyone.